So thank you, Jean. Thanks, everyone. Hello again. Thanks for having me on. So I'm going to do, as Jean said, a recap of the same session that I did on Friday. So if you were there, sorry that you are getting the same session again, but the speed run. If you weren't there, here we are. So I'm going to share the slide deck on the screen now. I'm going to drop it at the end. I'm going to drop a copy of the slide deck in the chat and also of the other materials that that I showed. So this is the session. So kind of real quick recap. So initially this session was in response to the air quality health advisory that was issued last week. So for anyone who was not aware, or maybe you weren't in New York at the time, but we did have a health advisory, and the purpose of that advisory really was it was in response to the smoke coming from traveling, rather, I should say, from the wildfires that were burning across Canada and the smoke that had traveled down to New York, to other states in the Northeast. I understand currently that has transitioned, that has moved kind of in the Midwest right now. I was talking to someone who's in Minneapolis who's yesterday, who said that they're feeling it this week there. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. So the idea behind the health advisory is really to alert New Yorkers that what was going on and to give them some guidance to what they should have been doing at the time. So to make sure everyone is on the same page about what wildfire smoke is and why we are concerned about wildfire smoke. So it's important for us to know that wildfire smoke itself contains a combination of particulate matter, which we are going to talk about in some depth in a little bit, because that becomes really relevant for us from the standpoint of protecting ourselves. So particulate matter, and also gases such as carbon monoxide, such as ozone, such as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs, and nitrogen dioxide. Okay, are there health effects associated with wildfire smoke exposure? Absolutely. We have, I'll talk about the studies a little bit later as well. A lot of the studies associated with wildfire smoke exposure predominantly have been done around firefighters. So it's a little difficult to say how applicable the firefighter studies are to the general population, but this is one that was done not in firefighters, the one that I have referenced here in the slides. This is one that was done on emergency department visits in the general population, and what they found was that extensive wildfire smoke exposure was associated with both cardiovascular and cerebrovascular ED visits, particularly in adults over 65. So there are absolutely health concerns associated with this smoke exposure. Now, some things that we definitely saw in the news, some terms that we saw that maybe we are very familiar with, especially for those of us who are already familiar with particulate matter in general, or are otherwise in the occupational safety world, but some of us may be seeing these for the first time. So PM 2.5, right? Saw a lot of this last week in the news. So PM 2.5, what this is about is PM is the abbreviation for particulate matter, right? I told you we'd come back to that. This is one of the components of wildfire smoke. So PM is really just the abbreviation for particulate matter. Now, when we talk about particulate matter, size very much makes a difference, right? So when we talk about size of particulate matter, we're generally talking about diameter, right? We probably remember this particular conversation from when we talked about COVID a few years back. When we talk about diameter of particulate matter, generally speaking, we're measuring it in microns. So when we say PM 2.5, what we're talking about is particulate matter that has a diameter of 2.5 microns or smaller. Now, For kind of relative comparison, when we talk about the diameter of human hair, we are talking about something that has a diameter of 50 to 70 microns in diameter. So as you can imagine, a diameter of 2.5 is really, really, really very small, right? So these are particles that are small enough they can travel down to your alveoli, down to the deeper part of your lungs and cause damage there. Okay, so that is what we're talking about here. Also, kind of for reference, when we talk about particles that we can inhale or not, right? So Gene, you've probably heard you've probably heard Gene talk about this before, but particles, you may have seen the term PM10, or particles that have a diameter of 10 microns, right? These are particles that are roughly the size, again, 10 microns diameter. These are the kinds of things that tend to get trapped or filtered out in your nose hair, in the mucous membrane, that do not generally get travel past this region, right? Your nose and your mouth, right? So again, when we're talking about PM 2.5, these are things that are much smaller, travel much further. Okay, so far so good? Cool. All right. Other terms you have probably seen in the news last week, the air quality index, AQI, right? So what this is, sorry, one second. What this is really just a color-coded system that the EPA developed it's meant to give you a quick eyeball of where you're at, like how clean the air quality is, right? Clean the air quality is. And in terms of pollution, it's a scale that goes from 0 to 500. And the higher the number, the higher the level of pollution. And the idea there is, this is meant to guide you in terms of, depending on what level the air pollution is at, where in the scale it is, there are certain measures you are advised to take into effect. So here, this is not exactly what the scale looks like if you go to the website, and the links for the website are up here for you. But this is just the condensed version so that we could have the English and Spanish in the same chart. But this is roughly what the scale looks like, right? So it's color-coded green to maroon. Again, the lower the number is, the better the air quality, right? And this is here on the right, this is the descriptor, right? So usually pre-air quality, if you kind of check out, and I'll show you where you can do that. But usually if you are looking at the air quality in New York, it's roughly hovering around good or moderate, because we do have a lot of car traffic in New York City. So car traffic, between all that, our air quality is somewhere around moderate anyway. So let me actually, yep. So that is kind of where we're at. Last week we were hovering between the 200s, sometimes hitting the 300s. So that's, obviously we were in health warning and emergency conditions. Okay, so this is your AQI basics chart. There's also the second chart that is a different link. And again, I'll show you where you can find that in a sec. But this one gives you not just kind of the description of what the air quality is, but it also gives you recommendations for what you should be doing about that, right? So for example, when the air quality hits over, when the air quality index is at 101 or higher, it is considered unhealthy for sensitive groups, right? So it gives you a definition of what sensitive groups, what that what that includes, and we'll talk about that in detail in a couple minutes, but also what then the recommendations are, right? So shorten outdoor activities, right? Follow your asthma action plan. What symptoms you should be on the lookout for, and if you see them, contact your healthcare provider, right? These are the kinds of recommendations we're talking about. As you get into more severe situations, right? Higher air quality index, right? Where again, we're looking at avoiding intense activities. So these are the recommendations that are here. Now, I will say this about the air quality index. This is not a bad idea on the face of it, but this is not necessarily advice that is attainable for everybody. And what I mean by that is, if you are able to shelter indoors, if you are able to stay home and follow the advice such as avoid outdoor activities, avoid all physical activity outdoors, remain indoors, that's great, right? But not everyone's able to do that. Some people work outside, some people have to leave their house or leave their whatever situation and go outside and so forth. And so not everyone is able to perfectly adhere to the guideline of remain indoors and shelter there. So other things are needed in addition to that. Okay. So far, so good. Cool. Okay. So I told you we come back to kind of these high risk groups. So the now I'm going to preface this to say that I should have said at the top of it, but I'm going to kind of say it here. So in New York, we obviously do not have a lot of experience with wildfire smoke. So kind of in the preparation of what everything was happening last week, NYCOSH was looking, I was looking, and a lot of people that I was working with to kind of figure out what we were supposed to do on the East Coast. We were all very much looking to the West Coast, to California, Oregon, Washington, who does have a lot of extensive experience, with wildfire smoke. So a lot of these recommendations that that I'm about to go through are pretty much heavily borrowed from California, from Washington State, from Oregon, because they've had some time now to both come up with their recommendations and to implement them and, see what works and reassess and redraft them accordingly. So that's where all of this is coming from. Okay. So generally speaking, kind of as we talked about right there, broadly, everyone is in some way impacted by wildfire smoke, right? Even if perfectly, people who have no underlying health conditions are in great health. If you were outside for any extensive period, Wednesday through Friday last week, you're all feeling like, oh, this is not, breathing outside is feeling not very great, right? So all of us to some extent are susceptible to, again, to heavy smoke pollution, to particulate matter, but similar to any other respiratory situation, there is a particular concern for people who do have pre-existing respiratory conditions, people who do have pre-existing heart conditions, right? It is more dangerous for them to be exposed to additional respiratory stressors, and it is more difficult for them. Similarly, again, as we saw from the study I mentioned earlier, adults over 65 years of age, people who are pregnant, young children, all of these people, all these groups do have a harder time dealing with additional respiratory stressors. So those are kind of like the most commonly talked about high-risk groups. But the other thing, again, that we want to highlight is people who are working outside, who are exposed to the wildfire smoke, to the pollution from wildfire smoke for extended periods of time, because they are working outside, because they're involved in strenuous physical activity as they're working outside. are also at higher risk, right? People who are exposed to denser smoke, again, because they're working outside or because they're working closer to that smoke, are at higher risk as well. Okay, so just want to highlight that also. Also, I apologize. There's like a helicopter hovering pretty much directly over my building. So if you're hearing noise from that, I apologize. Some of the symptoms that we would expect, similar to a lot of other particulate particulate exposure on the mild end, eye, nose, and throat irritation, sinus irritation, coughing, runny nose, headache, fatigue, right? But then getting into some of the more serious health effects, chest pain, difficulty breathing, tachycardia, increased heart rate, right? Asthma attack or asthma exacerbation. And also, as we have seen, exacerbation of existing health conditions. There was one of the studies that came up is in the aftermath of a particularly heavy, this was, I think, from either California or Oregon. It slips my mind which state specifically, but they did a study in the aftermath of a very, very heavy wildfire season. And what they found is that following that heavy wildfire season, there were a lot more influenza infections that following year. So they're thinking there might be some link between the exposure to wildfire smoke and seasonal flu as well. So it was one study, but something to think about as well. So what then are the recommendations to protect oneself? So again, these are the recommendations that we've been seeing to how to protect oneself on an individual level. So looking at local health reports and the air quality index to kind of get an idea of where we're at, what the air quality is, and what we should be doing or shouldn't be doing, right? Avoiding as much as possible strenuous outdoor activity. If you are someone who does outdoor work, if you have control over that, minimize that as much as possible. If that requires advocating through your union or for modification of duties, then absolutely that is something to do. Wearing a respirator, and we'll talk about the types of respiratory protection in a sec, but wearing a respirator when outside, as much as possible, staying inside, keeping windows and doors shut. If it's too hot inside, you can run the AC, but make sure that any fresh air intake is closed so that you're not bringing in the outdoor air, because we're obviously trying to avoid that. So this is basically everything we were talking about during COVID about maximizing all the fresh air you're bringing in. Forget all that for when we're having these kinds of air quality emergencies where it's the outdoor air that is contaminated. Everything I said during COVID, forgetting that, putting that on pause, minimizing outdoor air intake because we're not bringing in, we don't want to bring in contaminated air, okay? So making sure we're doing that, increasing filtration indoors, right? And also be mindful of not increasing air pollution, right? I know also for me, like, personally, it was really hard not to clean everything in my apartment when everything was feeling so dusty. But when you vacuum, you kick up all the particles indoors already. So not vacuuming, not burning candles, not not barbecuing, so not adding to pollution, particle pollution that's already there. So that's on an individual level. Okay, on a workplace organizational level. This one is pretty much straight out of California. So they actually, this is part of their workplace regulations now. So they have their state level OSHA, and this is what their, this is straight out of Cal OSHA. they require using that AQI as guidance for when to implement different kinds of engineering and administrative level protections. So the idea there is to aim for an AQI level of below 151. Now, as we saw here, right, at 151, we are at, this is the alert for pretty much everybody, but at an AQI of above 101, people who are considered being in the sensitive groups are probably already experiencing some kind of health effects. So I just want to highlight that, yes, this is probably a smaller group, but let's not leave these people out, right? And being mindful that there are people who are probably already going to be feeling health effects and suffering at, below the AQI of 151, and making sure that we are considering them within our work plan as well. Okay. So, making sure that we are considering that and keeping that in mind when making our plans. But at AQI of 151 and above, Cal-OSHA recommends additional engineering controls, such as, if there is work outside being done, building an additional enclosure and adding filtration. So this is for outdoor workers. If we're talking about people who are working indoors, providing additional air filtration units. So that's on like the engineering controls in terms of changing physically the workplace. From an administrative standpoint, we could change the work location. So if there's a work location that doesn't have any air filtration, or there's no ability to improve the air filtration, consider changing that location, right? So if people are working at an office and the office doesn't have any air filtration, maybe allow people to work from home so they don't have to travel or commute. Or on the flip side, if people do not have any good air quality provisions at home, maybe they could travel somewhere else, right? To another. So depending on what the situation is, allowing people to work at a location that has improved air quality. Changing schedule, right? Changing the light duty if necessary, like the physical demands of the work, right? So these are kinds of the administrative changes. And then also providing access, making sure people have N95s or better, right? So respiratory protection. Okay, and we're going to talk about the respiratory protection now. And I think then we're going to end there because I know I'm like cutting it close to the half. Okay, all right. So respiratory protection, here we go. So the N95s have predominantly been the respiratory protections that has been most recommended. Now, I do not have all of my like array of respiratory protection in front of me right now. I apologize, but N95s are the filtering face piece that has the straps that go around the back of your head, right? One strap above here, one strap around the back of your neck. KN95s, same filtering face piece, but it has ear straps. The face piece itself is the same. The main difference between the two of them is that because the N95 goes around the head, it's a tighter fit. So it's just, it's a little more secure on the face. It forms a tighter seal. So the idea there is it's less likely that there's stuff, the air and therefore contamination is going to be coming through around the face piece rather than through it. That being said, for most people, if you are not doing strenuous work, if you are just putting on the respirator to go to the corner store, to travel, to go to the office, or to go to visit your mother or whoever, for most people, the N95s or the KN95s are sufficient. For people who are doing, who are working outside, for people especially who are doing strenuous work outside, I would recommend higher levels of respiratory protection, a half face with P100s or better. But again, that's for people who are doing work outside, who are doing strenuous work outside. If you are just, again, traveling through the streets, you're probably, N95 is probably more than adequate. Cloth and paper masks, loose fitting face coverings are really not sufficient for dealing with the with PM 2.5 or the smoke pollution. They are better than no face covering at all, but we really want to be looking at something that has particulate filtration. Okay, so then again, your N95s, KN95s, that kind of respiratory protection. Okay, here are some, in case you have still at this point not been familiar with respiratory protection. So the N95s, look, there's a lot of different versions like this. When I said the half face with the P100s for outdoor workers, this is what I mean. The full face with particulate protection this looks like that. There's a power air purifying respirator, the PAPRs. That's these guys. So these are all air purifying respirators. Again, unless you're doing like strenuous outdoor work, N95s for most people are perfectly fine. If you're looking at the supplied air respirators, the self-containing breathing apparatus, SCBA, these are things that firefighters wear. So unless you are fighting the fire, you should absolutely not be wearing this, right? I do not want to see anybody wearing this to go to the corner store. So please do not. All right. So that's kind of, this is the lay of the land with respirators. Okay. And then last but not least, I just want to remind everyone about paid sick leave in New York State, right? You all actually probably do not need a reminder on this because you have your own contract, but New York State does have paid sick leave for anyone who works more than 40 hours. Sorry, for anyone who works who has in a workplace more than 5 full-time employees is allowed up to 40 hours of paid sick time. Workplaces with 100 or more employees up to 56 hours of paid sick leave time, and that is protected for anyone who is sick themselves or is taking care of a sick family member. So that's the end. I'll be in the chat for questions and almost on time. Go me.
Okay, thank you, Marina. That was really informative. So I'm going to, are there any questions coming off of that? Okay. Well, you can, if you have questions and we, if we move on and you have a question, you can enter it in the chat. And I am going to stop recording here.